All right, so welcome to another deep dive. And today we're tackling something that I know you've all been really eager to kind of get into. And that is this idea of the U.S. government's potential involvement with UFOs,
Yeah.
right? And how they might go about revealing this information to the public.
Yeah.
You guys have sent in some really interesting excerpts from Grant Cameron's Managing Magic, the government's UFO disclosure project.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, just from like kind of glancing through it, this is going to be, I think, a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
So maybe just to kind of kick things off, what are some of the things that jumped out at you when you first started reading this?
Um, I mean, I think the first thing that kind of struck me was how Cameron approaches the whole subject.
Okay.
He kind of steers clear of using terms like alien or extraterrestrial.
Right.
He opts for paranormal
Interesting.
as kind of his go-to term when he's talking about UFOs. Even when he defines disclosure, he's got kind of a broad definition. It's not just like a single event.
Mm-hmm.
It's any instance where secret information about UFOs is revealed is his definition of disclosure.
That's really interesting. It almost sounds like he's kind of setting the stage for a conversation about like, what do we even mean when we say UFOs and government knowledge, right?
Exactly.
Like it's not just about, spaceships landing on the White House lawn, is it?
Yeah, no, it's definitely suggesting that this disclosure thing could take many forms.
Yeah.
It could be subtle hints, it could be leaks, it could be more formal acknowledgments.
Right.
And, could involve revealing information about advanced technologies or the potential role of consciousness in the universe.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack that a little bit. Cameron lays out, I guess you could say, like a few different theories about how the government's handling all this UFO information.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you've got kind of the classic, like the complete cover-up theory, right?
Right.
That I think a lot of people kind of jump to first.
Sure. Yeah.
There's just like shadowy figures in suits and they're just hiding everything from us.
Yeah, the Men in Black.
Yeah, exact.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got full disclosure, right?
Right.
Which would be, I think a pretty earth-shattering event.
For sure.
Right, like a full-blown, yes, there are extraterrestrials. They're here. This is what we know.
Yeah.
But what Cameron seems to be arguing for is kind of this third path, this idea of gradual disclosure, right?
Yeah.
This idea that they're kind of intentionally leaking stuff bit by bit to maybe acclimate the public. Is that kind of how you interpreted it?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the main threads that runs through the book.
Mm-hmm.
And he backs it up with a lot of historical examples,
Okay.
I mean, think about Area 51.
Right.
The whole fascination with Area 51.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got, stories of people claiming to be contactees.
Right.
Even figures like Walt Disney might have been involved in shaping public perception about UFOs.
Wait, hold on. Disney and UFOs.
Yeah. Apparently, the Air Force approached Disney in the 1950s about making a documentary on UFOs.
What?
They promised him access to footage, but then ultimately they backed out saying they couldn't release it,
Oh, wow. So they kind of dangled it out there and then said, nope, just kidding.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That seems like a real classic case of them being hesitant to reveal too much, but why? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
If Cameron's right about this gradual disclosure, then why all the secrecy in the first place?
I mean, that's the big question.
Yeah.
And he actually lays out over 40 potential reasons for why the government might be keeping things under wraps.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty extensive list.
Yeah.
It covers things like national security, maintaining a military advantage, avoiding public panic, and even, and this is where it gets really interesting, possible agreements with aliens themselves.
Whoa, hold on. Agreements with aliens. Like treaties?
I mean, it's certainly a concept to consider. Imagine a scenario where the government has made deals with extraterrestrial beings to limit the amount of information that gets out to the public.
That is wild.
It raises a lot of questions about, who's really in control, what their motivations are, what the power dynamics are.
That's heavy stuff. So we've got the terminology, we've got the theories about government involvement, we've got the potential reasons for secrecy. But Cameron also kind of dives into specific people who have played key roles in all this, right? Like,
Right.
Who are some of the names that come up?
Well, he talks about Richard Doty, who's a figure often linked to disinformation campaigns.
Right.
And Bill Moore, who is a researcher who initially claimed to have worked with intelligence agencies,
Okay.
but later admitted to being part of a disinformation campaign.
Oh, wow.
So it really shook the UFO community at the time.
Hmm.
And it kind of highlights the fact that we got to be really careful about the information that's out there.
Yeah.
It's not always what it seems, especially when it comes to something as shrouded in mystery as UFOs.
For sure. Not everything is as it seems. So are there any figures who are kind of on the other side of that, right?
Right.
Who are pushing for more transparency?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he mentions John Podesta, who served as Clinton's chief of staff
Okay.
and who is known to be interested in UFOs.
Okay.
He even tried to get access to certain files when he was in office. And then there's Tom DeLonge.
Yeah, the Blink-182 guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Former member of Blink-182. And he's made some pretty big claims about working with high-level officials to promote UFO disclosure.
Yeah, he has. What does Cameron say about him?
Well, he acknowledges DeLonge's efforts and his connections to figures like Jim Semivan, who used to work for the CIA.
Oh, wow.
So it's another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
You know, this pop culture figure potentially playing a role in this whole interplay between secrecy and disclosure.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer to it. Okay, so we've covered, I mean, like the potential government strategies, reasons for secrecy, key figures. But something that really struck me when I was looking through this was how much Cameron also talks about the role of consciousness in all of this.
Yeah.
And like I have to admit, I'm really curious about this. Like, what is he getting at there?
Well, he suggests that any kind of full disclosure might require us to acknowledge the role of consciousness
Okay.
in the UFO phenomenon.
Right.
You know, and this could mean challenging our current scientific paradigms, considering the possibility that things like space and time and consciousness might be interconnected in ways that we don't fully understand.
It's like he brings up entangled particles, this idea that particles can be linked across vast distances.
Right.
Could that be related to how UFOs might be operating?
He definitely seems to imply that there's a connection there.
That's a really mind-bending concept.
It is.
But it also kind of points to this idea that like our current understanding of physics might just not be the whole story.
Right, exactly.
Right. And then on top of that, he introduces this core story theory, which is kind of crazy. It's this idea that the government might have like a central narrative about UFOs that they're revealing in very carefully controlled like little bits and pieces.
Right.
This core story, according to researcher Kit Green, could be the government's way of slowly acclimating the public
Right.
to a truth that might be hard to swallow all at once.
So it's like they're giving us puzzle pieces,
Yeah.
but we're not really sure what the final picture looks like.
Right. And it raises the question, is this gradual disclosure a deliberate strategy or just a byproduct of increasing leaks in public interest? I mean, are we being led to a greater understanding, or are we just stumbling across fragments of a truth that's largely hidden?
I mean, that's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And it feels like we've only just scratched the surface of what Cameron covers in this book. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Where do we even go from here?
Well, I think we need to get into some specific historical events.
Okay.
And I think a good place to start would be with a rather strange story involving a man named Paul Benowitz.
Okay.
You familiar with him?
I've heard the name, but I don't really know the details.
Okay, well, so Paul Benowitz, this Paul Benowitz case,
Yeah.
it kind of highlights like the blurred lines between genuine UFO interest and, potential disinformation campaigns.
Right.
So this guy, Paul Benowitz, he was an Albuquerque businessman, and he believed that he was monitoring alien activity
Okay.
near Kirtland Air Force Base.
Like he thought he was actually like intercepted.
Yeah, he thought
your
this
communication.
was intercepting alien communications.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So how did the government respond to that?
Well, according to Cameron, the Air Force, and specifically Richard Doty,
Okay.
the figure we mentioned earlier, who's often linked to these disinformation campaigns,
Right.
might have intentionally fed Benowitz false information,
Really?
basically, to keep him occupied and distracted from potentially more sensitive information.
So they were kind of using disinformation tactics on civilian who thought that he was like helping to uncover the truth about UFOs?
Yeah, that's
No way.
That's a little unsettling.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly raises ethical questions about, how far authorities might go to protect secrecy.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show how difficult it can be to separate fact from fiction in this field.
Yeah, it's like trying to put together a puzzle where like some of the pieces are intentionally designed to mislead you, right?
Exactly.
And to make things even more complicated, Cameron also brings up Bill Moore's involvement in the Benowitz case too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moore, who had been, a prominent UFO researcher,
Yeah.
later admitted to being part of this disinformation campaign. And it really shook the UFO community at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And he ultimately withdrew from UFO research altogether. Wow. It's kind of a cautionary tale about the complexities of this whole field, right? Like, even people who, seem to be on the side of truth and transparency can get caught up in these webs of deception. It makes you wonder who you can really trust.
Yeah, for sure. But putting aside the disinformation aspect for a minute, Cameron does present some pretty compelling examples of potential disclosure efforts. That go beyond just feeding people false information. He talks about a planned documentary from the early 70s that was supposed to reveal UFO information to the public.
Right, a government-sanctioned documentary about UFOs? That's pretty surprising.
It was going to be kind of this public relations move, something to improve the military's image after Vietnam.
Okay.
Cameron even interviewed Robert Emenegger and Alan Sandler, the filmmakers involved.
Okay.
So this is a real thing.
So what happened? Like, why didn't it ever see the light of day?
Seems like the Air Force got cold feet at the last minute.
Really?
Cited national security concerns.
Wow. Classic. Like, they get close to revealing something, then they just pull back.
Yeah, and this kind of pattern, it pops up throughout history.
Right.
Cameron details similar efforts during Jimmy Carter's presidency.
Oh, yeah, right. Carter was supposedly pretty open to, releasing UFO information. I mean, he even claimed to have had his own UFO sighting, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But according to Cameron, Carter faced a lot of pushback from powerful forces within the government.
Right.
Who just weren't ready to let the public in on the secret.
It's almost like, there's this government within the government that's operating in the shadows and controlling information about UFOs and who knows what else.
Right. Cameron even quotes Bill Clinton, who alluded to this very idea in a conversation with a reporter.
Wow. Really?
Yeah. He kind of implied that there were forces within the government that he, as president, didn't even have control over.
That's a little chilling when you think about it.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you consider the implications for transparency and accountability.
Yeah. So if even the president might not have the full picture,
right,
then who's really calling the shots here? I mean, Cameron brings up the MJ-12 group.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that there's some debate about whether that group even exists.
Yeah, the MJ-12 thing it's kind of a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It's supposedly this secret group within the government that's been tasked with managing the UFO secret.
Right.
But the evidence for its existence it's pretty murky, to say the least.
Right.
There have been allegations of forged documents, deliberate disinformation campaigns, surrounding the whole MJ-12 thing. So it's hard to know what to believe.
It's tough to separate fact from fiction there. But even if MJ-12 is a myth, like this idea of a hidden group controlling UFO information, it persists, right?
Oh.
Cameron talks about this other group, the UFO working group that supposedly operated within the Defense Intelligence Agency in the 80s.
Yeah, the UFO working group. And this wasn't just like a figment of somebody's imagination.
Right.
Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Howard Blum, he investigated it.
Oh, wow.
And according to his findings, this group was actually tasked with looking into the UFO phenomenon and assessing any potential threats to national security.
Well, yeah. I mean, it makes sense that they would want to figure out if there's any kind of danger, right?
Right.
But of course, the findings are still classified, so we don't really know what they concluded.
Right, exactly.
And we can't forget about Tom DeLonge, right? And his claims about working with these former government officials on this whole UFO disclosure project.
Yeah, the DeLonge thing, it's an interesting wrinkle in all of this.
Yeah.
Especially given his connections to people like Jim Summervan, who's a retired CIA officer, and John Podesta, who we talked about earlier. So, whether his efforts will lead to anything concrete, it remains to be seen.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a sign that this push for transparency is not going away.
It seems like we're just stuck in this constant tug of war between, secrecy and disclosure.
Yeah.
And we just get these little glimpses behind the curtain, then it just slams shut again. It's kind of frustrating, to say the least.
Yeah, that's the paradox that Cameron really highlights in his work. He makes a really compelling case for this gradual disclosure thing.
Right.
But he also acknowledges the powerful forces that might be resisting it.
Right.
So it's really up to each of us to kind of sift through the evidence, think critically about it, and draw our own conclusions.
So after kind of diving deep into Cameron's work, like, what do you think is like the key takeaway here?
I mean, for me, it's critical thinking.
Okay.
It's absolutely crucial to approach this topic with a discerning eye.
Right.
You know, to question assumptions, to consider multiple perspectives.
It's easy to get caught up in, the excitement or the fear or whatever surrounding all of this.
Yeah, exactly.
But we need to remember to think for ourselves.
Yeah.
And to really like carefully evaluate the information that's out there.
And we also have to remember the human element in all of this.
Yeah.
We're dealing with real people who have had extraordinary experiences, people within the government who are, grappling with the implications of all of this, and people all over the world who are, searching for answers.
Yeah, their stories, their struggles, their attempts to make sense of all of this. It's all part of this incredible narrative.
And that's what makes it so compelling.
Yeah.
It's not just about, science or technology or government secrecy.
Right.
It's about our place in the universe.
Yeah.
It's about our understanding of reality. And it's ultimately about our shared human journey.
Well said. So I think we've covered a pretty impressive amount of ground today.
Yeah, we have.
We've kind of gone through potential disclosure strategies, the reasons for secrecy, historical events, key players, even the philosophical implications of all this. But I feel like Cameron is kind of leaving us with one final thought-provoking question here.
Well, and that question is, if the government is indeed employing this strategy of gradual disclosure, what might the next steps in this process look like?
Yeah.
How might they reveal more information without causing, widespread panic or social upheaval?
Right.
And how can we, as individuals and as a society, prepare ourselves for a truth that might challenge everything we thought we knew about the world?
Those are some really big questions.
Yeah, they are.
And I think that's a great place to kind of leave it for today. But I have a feeling this is a conversation that we're going to be continuing for quite some time. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into this fascinating world of UFOs and government secrecy.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep looking up, keep asking questions, and keep an open mind. Okay, so we've talked about, the potential for disclosure reasons for secrecy, the history, the key figures, and even this mind-bending connection to the paranormal.
Yeah.
But what about the impact of all of this? Like, if the truth about UFOs really were revealed, how would it change things? Like, what does Cameron say about that?
Well, Cameron, he dedicates a good chunk of his book to exploring the potential consequences of disclosure.
Okay.
And he really doesn't shy away from either the positive or the negative possibilities.
Okay, so on the one hand, what are some of the good things that could come from, like, actually revealing the truth about UFOs?
Well, I mean, for starters, imagine the scientific advancements.
Yeah.
If we could understand the technology that powers a UFO, think about the breakthroughs we could make in energy transportation, maybe even space travel.
Yeah, it'd be like something straight out of science fiction.
Right.
We could solve our energy crisis overnight.
Yeah.
And instead of, clunky rockets, we could be zipping around the galaxy in sleek, silent UFOs.
It's a pretty exciting thought.
It is. And beyond the technology, like, what about the impact on humanity as a whole?
Yeah.
Could it actually bring us closer together?
I think it's possible. If we're all facing this shared reality of extraterrestrial life, it might help us put aside some of our differences and focus on our common future.
Yeah, it's like that moment in a disaster movie where everyone suddenly bands together to face a common threat.
Right.
Maybe facing the unknown together could help us overcome some of the divisions that we're dealing with here on Earth.
Yeah, exactly. But on the flip side, Cameron also acknowledges that disclosure could have some pretty unsettling consequences.
Right. I mean, it's not hard to imagine people freaking out if everything they thought they knew about the universe was suddenly turned upside down.
Yeah.
I mean, not everyone is ready to accept the idea of aliens.
Right.
Let alone the possibility of things like interdimensional travel or the role of consciousness in shaping reality.
And then on top of the social and psychological upheaval, there's a potential for political and economic turmoil.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Disclosure could destabilize existing power structures,
Mm-hmm.
lead to conflicts over resources, technology, who controls the narrative.
It's like we're talking about like a high-stakes game of chess,
Right.
but on a global scale.
Right.
It's kind of scary when you think about it.
And that's why I think Cameron's work is so important. It helps us understand the complexity of this issue,
Yeah.
the potential benefits and risks,
Yeah.
and all the different forces that are at play. It's not just about believing or disbelieving in UFOs.
Right.
It's about recognizing the profound implications of what a true understanding of this phenomenon might mean for humanity.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. So after going through all of this, what do you think is the biggest takeaway for you?
For me, it all comes back to critical thinking.
Okay.
We're bombarded with information all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
From official statements to leaked documents to sensationalized media reports.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to believe sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we need to approach this topic with a discerning eye, question our assumptions, and be willing to consider multiple perspectives.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement or the fear surrounding UFOs,
Right.
but we can't forget to think for ourselves.
Exactly. And I think it's also important to remember the human element in all of this.
Yeah.
And we're dealing with real people who have had these extraordinary experiences, people within the government who are wrestling with the implications, and people all over the world who are searching for answers.
Their stories, their struggles, their attempts to kind of make sense of all of this.
Right.
It's a powerful thing.
And that's what makes this whole topic so compelling. It's not just about science or technology or government secrecy.
Right.
It's about our place in the universe, our understanding of reality, and ultimately our shared human journey.
That is really well said.
Huh.
Well, I think we've covered an incredible amount of ground today.
Yeah, we have.
We explored potential disclosure strategies, the reasons for secrecy, historical events, key players, even the philosophical implications of the UFO phenomenon.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. But I have a feeling Cameron leaves us with one final thought-provoking question to ponder.
He does. And that question is, if the government is indeed employing this strategy of gradual disclosure, what might the next steps in this process look like? How might they reveal more information without causing widespread panic or social upheaval?
Yeah.
And how can we as individuals and as a society prepare ourselves for a truth that might challenge everything we thought we knew about the world?
Those are some really big questions, and definitely something for us all to think about. So on that note, I think we're going to wrap things up for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of UFOs and government secrecy.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep looking up, keep asking questions, and keep an open mind.